The entire mansion fell silent the moment the boy spoke. For 6 years, Tunde Isaac had never said a word, not after the night his mother died. Doctors called it trauma. His father, the powerful CEO Nsikan Isaac, called it a curse he couldn't fix with money. But now in front of the grand staircase, the mute boy was clinging to a poor maid in a faded dress, trembling. And then in a fragile, broken whisper, he said, "It, Mom." Gasps echoed. Faces turned pale. Nsikan froze. Because the woman his son had chosen was the one they had just accused of stealing. Where are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? Don't forget to subscribe and be part of this journey. Amara Okoye had learned very early in life that kindness was expensive, not in money because she barely had any, but in consequences. That morning the sun rose slowly over the crowded rooftops of Ajagunle, Lagos, painting the rusted zinc sheets in a dull orange glow. The streets were already alive with noise vendors, shouting motorcycles weaving through tight corners, children chasing one another barefoot on the dusty ground. It was a place where survival was louder than dreams. Inside a small, crumbling one-room shack at the edge of a narrow alley, Amara was already awake. She knelt beside a thin mattress laid on the floor, gently adjusting the damp cloth on her younger brother's forehead. Chinedu, only 12, lay weak and pale, his breathing shallow. His body burned with fever that refused to go away. Amara pressed her palm lightly against his cheek, her brows tightening. "Just hold on a little longer," she whispered softly. "I'll find a way. I promise." Her voice carried a quiet strength, one that didn't come from certainty but from refusal to give up. On a wooden stool nearby sat a small plastic container. Inside it were a few wrinkled Naira notes and coins, everything she had left after buying his last dose of medication 2 days ago. It wasn't enough, not even close. The doctor at the local clinic had already warned her. If Chinedu didn't get proper treatment, soon real treatment, not cheap, substitutes, his condition could worsen beyond control. But real treatment required money. Money she didn't have. Amara stood slowly tying the faded blue scarf around her head. Her dress, once bright, had long lost its color, worn thin from years of washing and mending. Still she smoothed it down carefully, as if dignity could be stitched into fabric. Before stepping out, she turned back one more time. "I'll be back before night," she said gently. Chinedu didn't respond. He barely had the strength to move. That silence followed her out the door. The hotel where Amara worked stood in sharp contrast to everything she had just left behind. Glass walls, marble floors, air conditioning so cold it made her skin tighten. Guests who wore perfumes that cost more than a year of her wages. She had been working there for almost 8 months, cleaning rooms, carrying luggage, doing whatever was asked without complaint, because losing this job was not an option. Not now. Not when Chinedu needed her more than ever. That day, however, something shifted. It started quietly. Amara was assigned to clean one of the luxury suites on the 3rd floor. When she entered, she noticed something unusual. A small boy no older than 7 standing near the balcony door. He was barefoot. His clothes were dirty. His eyes were wide and uncertain. He didn't belong there. Amara paused. "Hey? Are you okay?" she asked softly. The boy flinched, stepping back as if expecting to be chased away. Before he could answer, a sharp voice cut through the room. "What is that child doing here?" A well-dressed woman stormed in her heels, clicking loudly against the marble floor. Gold bracelets clinked at her wrists as she pointed aggressively at the boy. "I told the staff to keep these street kids out. They steal, they smell, they ruin everything." The boy shrank, his small hands trembling. Amara felt something tighten inside her chest. "He looks scared," she said carefully. "Maybe he just wandered in." "I don't care," the woman snapped. "Get him out, now." The room fell into a heavy silence. Amara looked at the boy again. His eyes met hers full of fear, but also something deeper, hunger. Without thinking, Amara reached into her pocket and pulled out the small bread roll she had saved for her lunch. She crouched down slowly. "Take this," she said gently. The boy hesitated, then grabbed it quickly as if afraid it might disappear. He didn't even say thank you. He just ran. The woman scoffed. "Disgusting. You people encourage them. That's why they keep coming back." Amara stood up slowly. "He's just a child," she replied quietly. The woman's eyes narrowed. "And you're just a maid. Don't forget your place." By afternoon, the manager had called Amara into his office. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. "Miss Okoye," he said, adjusting his glasses, "we received a complaint from a VIP guest." Amara stood still. "You were seen giving food to an unauthorized individual inside the premises." "He was hungry," she said simply. "That's not your concern." Silence. "You violated hotel policy. You created discomfort for a paying guest." Amara swallowed. "I didn't steal. I didn't damage anything. I just helped." And that the manager interrupted is exactly the problem. He slid a paper across the desk. Termination. Effective immediately. For a moment, the world felt like it had stopped. Amara stared at the paper, not because she didn't understand it, but because she understood it too well. "Please," she said softly, "I need this job. My brother is sick. I can't." "I'm sorry," the manager replied, though his tone carried no real apology. "We have standards to maintain." Standards. Amara nodded slowly, not in agreement, but in acceptance, because arguing would change nothing. That evening, the sky turned dark earlier than usual. Clouds gathered heavy and low, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Amara walked home with slow, measured steps, the termination letter folded tightly in her hand. Every sound felt distant, every thought too loud. How would she tell Chinedu? How would she buy his medicine? How much time did they have left? As she reached the alley, the first drops of rain began to fall. Soft at first, then harder. She didn't run. She didn't rush. She just kept walking. Because sometimes when life collapses quietly, there is nowhere to run to. When she pushed open the door, the room felt colder than before. Chinedu was still lying on the mattress, still breathing, but weaker. Amara knelt beside him, brushing wet strands of hair away from her face. "I'm here," she whispered. Her voice trembled for the first time that day. She looked at the small plastic container again, empty, completely empty. And yet, she forced a smile, because hope for her was not a feeling. It was a decision. "I'll find another way," she said softly, even though she had no idea how. Outside, the rain fell harder. Inside, a quiet battle continued, unseen, unnoticed. But far from over, Nsikan Isaac had built his life on control. Control over numbers, control over outcomes, control over people. In the towering glass headquarters of Isaac Holdings, his name alone carried weight. Decisions were made before he even spoke, and silence often meant approval or destruction. He was known across Lagos as a man who never hesitated, never doubted, and never lost. But inside his own home, there was one thing he could not control: his son. The Isaac mansion stood far from the chaos of Ajagunle, tucked behind high gates, lined with trimmed hedges and guarded by men who barely blinked. Inside, everything was polished marble floors that reflected light like water chandeliers, that shimmered above quiet hallways, and walls decorated with art that spoke of wealth, legacy, and power. Yet none of it could fill the silence. Tunde Isaac sat on the floor of his room, surrounded by toys he never played with. A wooden train lay dismantled beside him. A tablet rested untouched on the bed. Even the television mounted perfectly across from him played cartoons to an audience that did not react. He stared at nothing, not blankly but deeply, as if he was watching something no one else could see. His fingers moved slowly, tracing invisible patterns on the floor. Sometimes he would pause his small body, stiffening his breath, catching slightly like a memory had brushed against him. Then he would freeze and stay that way for minutes, for hours, until someone noticed. "Mr. Isaac, the therapist, is here." The voice came from Mama Maid, the elderly housekeeper, who had served the Isaac family long before Tunde was born. Her presence carried warmth that the rest of the house lacked. Nsikan stood near the window in his study, looking out over the wide lawn. His phone rested in his hand, unread messages glowing on the screen. "Send her in," he said without turning. Moments later, a young woman in a neat suit stepped inside, holding a folder close to her chest. "Good afternoon, sir," she greeted politely. "I'm Dr. Adebayo." Nsikan nodded slightly. "I've read your reports," he said, "but I prefer results to paperwork." There was no hostility in his tone, only expectation. Dr. Adebayo hesitated for a brief second before responding. "I understand, sir, but with children like Tunde, progress doesn't always come in visible ways." Nsikan finally turned. 6 years, he said quietly. The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. He hasn't spoken in 6 years. Dr. Adebayo met his gaze, careful but steady. "Trauma can do that, sir, especially when it happens at a young age." Nsikan's jaw tightened. "I don't need a definition. I need a solution." Silence stretched between them. Then she spoke again, softer this time. "May I see him?" Tunde didn't react when they entered his room. He remained on the floor, his back slightly curved, his attention fixed on something invisible. Dr. Adebayo crouched a few steps away, careful not to invade his space. "Hello, Tunde," she said gently. No response. She waited. Still nothing. Mama Sade stood quietly by the door, her hands clasped together. She had seen this scene too many times. New therapists, new voices, new hopes, all fading into the same silence. Nsikan watched from behind. His face showed no emotion, but his eyes betrayed something deeper. Fatigue, not from work, from helplessness. Dr. Adebayo reached into her bag and took out a small toy, a soft puppet shaped like a lion. She moved it slowly, making it walk across the floor toward Tunde. "Look," she said lightly. "He wants to say hello." The puppet paused near Tunde's knee. Tunde didn't look, didn't move, didn't blink. The puppet waved. Nothing. Minutes passed, then suddenly, a sound. Faint. Sharp. Tunde's breathing changed. His shoulders tensed. His fingers froze mid-motion. Dr. Adebayo immediately noticed. "What is it?" she whispered. But she already sensed the shift. Something had triggered him. From the hallway, voices. 2 staff members arguing in hushed but tense tones. "You were supposed to handle it." I said I didn't know. The words were unclear, but the tension was not. Tunde's body reacted instantly. His hands shot up to his ears. His breathing became rapid, uneven. His eyes widened, not in confusion, but in recognition. Fear. Deep-rooted fear. "No, no," Mama Maid murmured, stepping forward. But it was already happening. Tunde curled inward, his small body trembling violently. A sound escaped him, not a word, not a cry, something in between, a broken, trapped noise. Dr. Adebayo quickly moved closer. "It's okay, Tunde. You're safe," she said, her voice calm but urgent. He didn't hear her. He wasn't there anymore. He was somewhere else, somewhere in the past. The sound of glass shattering, a woman's voice, sharp, desperate. "No, you can't do this." A man shouting, footsteps, a door slamming. Tunde's memory was not clear. It never was, but it always came in fragments. Sounds, shadows, fear. "Make it stop," Mama Sadie shouted toward the hallway. "Quiet." The arguing voices disappeared immediately, but the damage was done. Tunde rocked back and forth, his breath coming in short bursts, his face pale. Nsikan stepped forward. For a moment his usual control slipped. "Tunde," he said, his voice low but firm. "Look at me." No response. "Tunde." Still nothing. Dr. Adebayo shook her head slightly. "Sir, shouting won't help." Nsikan clenched his fists, then slowly released them. He lowered himself to the floor, something he rarely did. He wasn't used to meeting anyone at their level. But this was his son. He placed his hand gently on Tunde's shoulder, not forcefully, not urgently, just there. "I'm here," he said quietly. It wasn't a command, it wasn't even reassurance. It was an attempt, a rare one. Tunde's trembling didn't stop immediately, but after a few moments, it slowed. His breathing softened slightly, not calm, but less broken. Dr. Adebayo watched carefully. Then she spoke. "Sir, has he ever reacted like this before?" Nsikan didn't answer right away. His eyes remained on Tunde. "Yes," he said finally. "Whenever he hears conflict, raised voices, sudden sounds." Dr. Adebayo nodded slowly. "That suggests his trauma is strongly linked to what he witnessed that night." The room fell quiet again. Nsikan's expression hardened. He was too young to understand anything. "Children don't need to understand to remember," she replied gently. That sentence lingered longer than expected, because somewhere deep inside, Nsikan knew it was true. Later that evening, the mansion returned to its usual silence, too clean, too perfect, too empty. Tunde sat by the window, now his small figure outlined against the fading light. Mama Sadie brought him a bowl of food, placing it gently beside him. "You have to eat, my child," she said softly. He didn't respond. But after she stepped away, he reached for the spoon. A small victory, invisible to most, but not to her. Across the hall, Nsikan stood alone in his study again. This time he wasn't looking at his phone. He was holding a framed photograph. Zainab. Her smile frozen in time, her eyes full of life that no longer existed. He stared at it longer than usual. Then quietly he spoke. "I don't know how to fix him." It was the closest thing to an admission he had made in years, because for the first time in his life, power meant nothing. Money meant nothing. Control meant nothing. And somewhere deep inside that silent mansion, a child was still trapped in a moment no one else could see, a moment that had stolen his voice and refused to give it back. Opportunity rarely knocked on Amara Okoye's door. It usually arrived quietly, unexpected, uncertain, and often disguised as something temporary. 2 days after losing her job, with Chinedu's condition growing worse and the weight of fear pressing harder against her chest, Amara found herself standing outside a large iron gate in Ikoyi, Lagos. The contrast alone was enough to make her hesitate. Behind her lay narrow streets, broken drains, and the constant noise of survival. Ahead of her stood silence, order, wealth, the kind of place where people didn't worry about tomorrow. She adjusted her scarf and tightened her grip on the small nylon bag she carried everything she owned for work neatly folded inside. Beside her stood Mama Said. "You must be respectful," the older woman said gently, though her tone carried quiet urgency. "This house is not like the others." Amara nodded. "Yes, Ma." Mama Said studied her for a moment. "I saw what you did at the hotel," she added. "People talk. They say you lost your job for helping a street child." Amara lowered her eyes slightly. "I couldn't ignore him." Mama Sadie's lips pressed together, not in disapproval, but in understanding. "That kindness," she said softly, "can open doors or close them." Then she turned and signaled to the guard. The gate opened. The Isaac mansion was even more imposing from the inside. Wide marble steps led up to a grand entrance framed by tall pillars. The doors alone looked heavier than anything Amara had ever touched. Inside, everything gleamed: floors, polished to a mirror-shine walls, decorated with expensive art, air carrying a faint scent of something clean and unfamiliar. Amara stepped carefully, almost afraid her presence might disturb the perfection around her. Mama Sadi led her through the main hall. "Just follow me. Don't speak unless spoken to." Amara nodded again. But before they could go further, a voice cut through the space. "Who is this?" The tone was sharp, cold, commanding. Amara turned. Standing at the base of the staircase was a woman in her late 50s, dressed in a richly patterned Ankara gown, her posture straight, her eyes scanning Amara from head to toe. Auntie Morenike. Even without introduction, Amara could feel it. This was someone who held power in the house. "She is the new help," Mama Sade replied calmly. "Temporary? Just for the boy." Morenike's gaze lingered. "Temporary?" she repeated. "Yes." Silence stretched. Then Morenike descended the stairs slowly, each step deliberate. When she reached Amara, she stopped close enough to inspect her properly. Too close. Amara could feel the weight of judgment without a word being spoken. "You look fragile." Morenike said, her lips curving slightly, not into a smile, but something sharper. Amara kept her head lowered. "I can work, Ma." Morenike let out a soft, humorless chuckle. "They all say that." Her eyes narrowed. "Do you steal?" The question came so suddenly that Amara almost looked up in shock, but she stopped herself. "No, Ma." "Do you lie?" "No, Ma." "Do you think this house is a place for pity?" Amara hesitated just for a second. Then, "No, Ma." Morenike studied her again as if searching for something hidden. Then she turned away dismissively. "We'll see." She began walking back toward the stairs. "And keep her away from anything valuable," she added casually. "People from where she comes from tend to forget boundaries." The words landed quietly, but heavily. Amara said nothing. She had learned long ago sometimes silence was the only way to keep moving forward. Mama Sadie led her upstairs. "Don't mind her," she whispered once they were out of earshot. "She has her reasons for mistrusting people." Amara didn't ask what those reasons were. It didn't matter. What mattered was why she was here. "The boy," Mama Sade continued, "his name is Tunde." Amara nodded. "He doesn't speak," the older woman added gently. "Not since his mother passed." Amara's steps slowed slightly. She didn't ask questions, but something about that information settled deep inside her. They reached a door at the end of the hallway. Mama Sade paused before opening it. "Just be calm," she said. "Don't force anything." Amara took a quiet breath, then nodded. The door opened. Tunde sat on the floor exactly as described. Small, still, silent. The room was filled with toys, expensive ones arranged neatly untouched. Sunlight filtered through the large window, casting soft shadows across the floor. For a moment, Amara didn't move. She simply observed, not the room, the child. There was something about the way he sat, the way his shoulders curved inward, the way his fingers moved slowly across the floor. It reminded her of Chinedu on his worst days, not physically, but emotionally, fragile, withdrawn, carrying something too heavy for his size. Mama Sadi stepped back. "I'll leave you," she said quietly. And then she was gone. The door closed. Now it was just the two of them. Amara took a slow step forward, then another. She didn't speak immediately. Instead, she lowered herself to the floor, leaving enough space between them. Not too close, not too far. She sat quietly, waiting. Minutes passed. Tunde didn't look at her, didn't acknowledge her presence, but Amara didn't rush. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small cloth doll, old, slightly worn, clearly handmade. She placed it gently on the floor between them. "This is Ada," she said softly. "My brother used to play with her when he was younger." No response. Amara smiled faintly, not expecting one. "She's not very beautiful," she continued lightly, "but she listens well." Still nothing. She picked up the doll and made it walk slowly across the floor. "Hello," she said in a soft, playful tone. "My name is Ada." "What's your name?" Silence, but something shifted, very slightly. Tunde's fingers paused, just for a second. Amara noticed, but she didn't react. She simply continued. "I think your room is very big," she said, still using the doll. "Maybe too big for one person." The doll looked around. "Do you get lonely?" That word lingered. Lonely. Tunde's shoulders tensed just a little. Amara lowered the doll again. Then gently she spoke, not to the doll this time. To be alone in a place like this can feel louder than noise. Her voice was quiet, but real. Not acting, not trying, just understanding. For the first time, Tunde moved his head slightly, not fully, just enough. A small shift, but enough to show he heard her. Amara didn't smile, didn't celebrate. She just stayed, present, calm, safe. Outside the room, Mama Sade stood quietly listening. Her eyes softened, because in all the months, in all the attempts, no one had managed that. Not therapists, not specialists, not even his own father. A reaction, small, but real. Inside, Amara slowly placed the doll back on the floor. Then she leaned back slightly, resting her hands on her knees. "I'll be here," she said softly, "even if you don't talk. No pressure, no expectation, just presence." And for a boy who had lived inside silence for 6 years, that was something new, something unfamiliar, something safe. Tunde didn't speak, not yet, but his fingers slowly moved again, this time not tracing invisible patterns, but inching, just a little, toward the doll. In the Isaac mansion, time did not pass the way it did outside. There were no loud street vendors calling out the hour, no children chasing shadows in the evening dust, no urgent rhythm of survival. Inside those walls, time moved slowly, quietly, almost cautiously. And in that quiet, something began to change. Not dramatically, not in a way that anyone could announce, but in the smallest, most fragile ways. Amara returned to Tunde's room the next morning with the same calm presence she had carried the day before. She did not knock loudly. She did not call out his name. She simply opened the door, stepped inside, and closed it gently behind her. Tunde was where she expected him to be, on the floor near the window, the light resting softly on his shoulders. But this time, the cloth doll was in his hand. Amara paused. She didn't smile immediately. She didn't speak, because she understood something most people didn't. Moments like this could disappear if you touched them too quickly. So instead, she walked quietly to the same spot she had chosen the day before and sat down. A safe distance, the same distance, consistency. Tunde didn't look at her, but he didn't hide the doll either. He held it loosely, his fingers curled around its worn fabric. That alone was enough. "Good morning," Ada Amara said softly, directing her voice toward the doll. No response, but Tunde's fingers tightened just slightly. Amara noticed. She always noticed. "I hope you slept well," she continued gently. "Did you keep our friend company?" Still silence, but not empty silence. This one had weight, meaning. Amara leaned back slightly, resting her hands on the floor behind her. "You know," she said, her voice calm and unforced, "my brother used to hold Ada like that when he was scared." That word again. Scared. Tunde's shoulders stiffened. His grip on the doll tightened. Amara didn't look at him directly. She spoke into the space between them. "He never liked loud voices either," she added quietly. "They made him feel like something bad was about to happen." The room remained still, but something inside it shifted, because even though Tunde had not spoken, he was listening. Days passed, and Amara did the same thing over and over, not because she lacked imagination, but because she understood something deeper than most. Trust is built in repetition, in predictability, in knowing that someone will show up the same way every time. She never forced conversation, never demanded a reaction. Instead, she told small stories about the market, about her childhood, about Shinedu, and the silly games he used to invent when they had nothing to play with. Sometimes she brought little things, a smooth stone, a folded paper bird, a piece of thread tied into a bracelet. Simple objects, but each one came with a story, and each story came with a feeling. Tunde never responded, but he stopped pushing things away. He stopped turning his back completely. And sometimes, when Amara thought he wasn't looking, his eyes would follow her hands. One afternoon, as the sun poured brightly into the room, Amara sat cross-legged on the floor, carefully folding a piece of old paper. Tunde watched, not directly, but enough. "This is a bird," she said softly. "It doesn't fly very far, but it tries." She placed the paper bird on the floor between them. It sat there, still, ordinary. Then she gently blew on it. It slid forward slightly. Tunde's eyes followed the movement, just for a second. Amara smiled faintly but kept her gaze lowered. "You can try," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. There was no pressure in her tone, no expectation, just invitation. The room held its breath. Seconds passed. Then slowly, carefully, Tunde leaned forward. His movement was hesitant, almost unsure of itself. His hand reached out, paused, then touched the paper bird. His fingers lingered, exploring, feeling. Amara didn't move, didn't speak. She simply watched from the corner of her eye. Tunde picked up the bird, turned it slightly, then placed it back down. Not where it was before, closer, closer to her. It was a small action, almost invisible, but it meant something. He had not rejected it. He had not withdrawn. He had participated. Amara exhaled slowly, a quiet release of something she hadn't realized she was holding. That evening, something even more unexpected happened. Mama Sadi had just finished preparing Tunde's dinner and placed the tray on the small table near his bed. "Eat a little, my child," she said gently before stepping out. Tunde sat on the floor as usual, staring ahead. The food remained untouched, as it often did. Amara entered a few moments later. She glanced at the tray, then at Tunde. She didn't tell him to eat, didn't insist. Instead, she walked over, sat beside the tray, and picked up the spoon. "You know," she said softly, "when Shinedu doesn't feel like eating, I pretend the food is talking to him." She lifted the spoon slightly. "Please don't leave me," she said in a quiet, playful voice. "I traveled a long way to be here." Silence, but not resistance. Amara scooped a small portion and held it up. "At least try me," she continued gently. Tunde didn't react immediately, but after a few seconds, he shifted, slowly. His eyes moved not to her face, but to the spoon. Then almost mechanically, he reached out. His fingers wrapped around the spoon. Amara let go without hesitation. He held it there, still. Then, slowly, he brought it to his mouth. A single bite, that was all. But it was more than before. Mama Sade, watching quietly from the doorway, covered her mouth with her hand. Because she understood. This wasn't about food, this was about trust. But not everyone in the house saw it that way. From the upper hallway, Auntie Mareniki stood watching, her expression unreadable, her eyes sharp, observing, calculating. She had noticed the changes too, the way Tunde no longer resisted completely, the way he allowed Amara near, the way something invisible was forming between them. And she didn't like it. Not at all. Because in her mind, nothing good came without a reason, and no one gave kindness without expecting something in return. She turned away slowly, her mind already working. If the girl was gaining influence over the boy, then she needed to understand why, and more importantly, how to stop it. Back inside the room, Amara sat quietly once again. Tunde had finished only a few bites, but he hadn't pushed the tray away. He hadn't retreated. He remained present. Amara didn't praise him, didn't celebrate. She simply stayed. Because she knew something most people didn't. Healing doesn't happen in big moments. It happens in quiet ones. Repeated, protected, nurtured. And sometimes all it takes is one person who refuses to leave. As the evening light faded, Tunde shifted slightly closer to where Amara sat. Not touching, not looking, but closer. And in that small, almost invisible movement, a fragile bridge began to form between silence and something that had not yet found its voice. Change, when it first appears, is often mistaken for danger. Inside the Isaac mansion, nothing went unnoticed for long, especially not something as unusual as Tunde responding to someone, and certainly not to a girl like Amara. By the end of the week, the small shifts had become impossible to ignore. Tunde no longer turned his back completely when Amara entered the room. He didn't hide the doll anymore. Sometimes he even waited quietly but noticeably for her to sit in the same place she always chose. To an outsider, it would still look like nothing. But inside the rigid world of the Isaac household, it was everything. Mama Sade saw it and felt hope blooming carefully in her chest. Nsikan noticed it, but refused to name it, as if acknowledging it would somehow make it fragile. And Auntie Mariniki. She saw it and grew uneasy. It began with whispers, low voices between staff in the kitchen. "Have you seen the boy lately? They say he eats when she's there. Maybe she's doing something. Something like what I don't know. But things don't change like that for no reason." Rumors did not need proof, only curiosity and fear. That afternoon, Morinike summoned Mama Sade. The older woman found her seated in the private lounge sipping tea with deliberate calm. "You've grown quite fond of that girl," Morinike said without looking up. Mama Sade stood respectfully. "She is doing her work well." Morinike smiled faintly. "That's not what I asked." Silence. "Then she is kind," Mama Sade replied. Morinike finally lifted her eyes. "Kindness is not a qualification." "No, Ma." "Then why is she here for the boy?" Morinike leaned back slightly, studying her. "And what exactly is she doing to him?" The question was sharp, not curious, but suspicious. Mama Sadie chose her words carefully. "She sits with him. She speaks gently. She doesn't force him. That's all. Yes." Morinike tapped her cup lightly against the saucer, then explained why he suddenly eats, why he doesn't react the same way. Mama Sade hesitated, because the answer was simple, but not acceptable in this house. "She makes him feel safe." The words hung in the air. Morinike's expression hardened just slightly. "Safe," she repeated, as if this house is not Mama Sade. Lowered her gaze. "I didn't say that, but she didn't need to." Later that day, Morinike decided to see for herself. She walked quietly down the hallway toward Tunde's room. Her steps measured, her face composed. The door was slightly open. Inside, Amara sat on the floor, as always. Tunde was closer to her than before, not touching, but within reach. Amara was telling a story, something simple about a bird that kept trying to build a nest even after it fell apart. Her voice was soft, steady. There was no performance in it, no attempt to impress, just presence. Morinike watched from the doorway. Her eyes narrowed. Because she didn't see manipulation, she didn't see tricks. She saw something worse, something she couldn't control, connection. Amara. The voice cut through the room, sharp, unexpected. Amara immediately turned, rising to her feet. "Yes, Ma." Morinike stepped inside slowly, her gaze flicking briefly to Tunde before returning to Amara. "You seem very comfortable here." Amara lowered her eyes. "I'm doing my work, Ma." "Your work?" Morinike repeated, circling slightly. "Does not include storytelling." Amara remained silent. It does not include emotional attachment, silence, and it certainly does not include becoming indispensable. The last word carried weight. Amara felt it, but she didn't respond because she understood something else too. Sometimes silence protected more than words. Morenike stopped in front of her. "You will remember your position," she said quietly. "You are here temporarily. Nothing more." "Yes, Ma." "Good." She turned to leave, but before she could step out, a sound, soft, broken, but unmistakable, a whimper. Morenike paused. Slowly she turned back. Tunde's body had stiffened. His hands were clenched tightly at his sides. His breathing had changed, not into full panic, but close, very close. His eyes were fixed not on Morenike's face, but on the tension in the room, the tone, the sharpness, the memory. Amara noticed instantly. She moved without hesitation, but gently, carefully. She didn't step between them, didn't challenge. She simply lowered herself back to the floor, back to where she had always been, a safe place. "It's okay," she said softly, not looking at him directly. "You're okay." Her voice carried no urgency, only calm, only presence. Tunde's breathing remained uneven. His fingers trembled. Morenike watched her expression unreadable. Then Amara reached for the cloth doll. She placed it quietly on the floor, closer to Tunde. "Look," she whispered. "Ada is here." The room held still. Tunde's eyes shifted, just slightly, from the tension to the doll. His breathing slowed. Not fully, but enough. Enough to stop the spiral. Amara didn't move again. She didn't push, didn't force. She just stayed, and slowly, very slowly, Tunde's body began to relax. The moment passed, like a wave that almost broke but didn't. Morenike turned away without another word, but her silence this time was different, heavier, because she had seen it, not imagined, not assumed. She had seen the boy respond not to authority, not to discipline, but to her. And that unsettled her more than anything. That night, the tension in the house grew thicker. Staff moved more carefully, voices stayed lower, eyes watched more closely, because something had shifted, and no one knew where it would lead. In his study, Nsikan sat alone once again, but this time he wasn't holding a photograph. He was reviewing reports, medical notes, therapy summaries, 6 years of attempts, 6 years of failure, and now something new, unexplained. He closed the file slowly. His mind replayed what Mama Seyde had said. She makes him feel safe, safe. The word echoed because it carried a question he wasn't ready to answer. If his son only felt safe with a stranger, then what did that say about him meanwhile? In the small room at the far end of the staff quarters, Amara sat on the edge of her bed, her phone pressed tightly to her ear. "Please, I understand," she said softly. "But can you give me more time? I will pay." Her voice was steady, but her fingers trembled. On the other end, the clinic receptionist sighed. "We can't keep holding the slot, Miss Okoye. The surgery deposit must be made." Amara closed her eyes briefly. "How long? A few days. After that, we give it to someone else." The line went quiet, then clicked, disconnected. Amara lowered the phone slowly. The room felt smaller, heavier, the weight of 2 worlds pressing against her at once. One filled with quiet hope, the other with urgent fear. She looked down at her hands, empty, again. But her mind was already moving, searching, refusing to stop, because giving up was never an option. Not for her, not for Chinedu, not now. Back in the main house, Tunde lay awake in his bed. The room was dark, silent, but not empty, because for the first time in years, something had changed inside him. Something small, something fragile, but real. He turned slightly, his hand reaching instinctively toward the edge of the bed, toward where someone had once been. And though no one was there, the feeling remained, faint but present, as if somewhere deep inside, a voice was beginning to find its way back. Rain had a way of exposing what silence tried to hide. That evening, the skies over Lagos darkened earlier than usual. Thick clouds gathered above the Isaac mansion, swallowing the last traces of sunlight. The air grew heavy, charged with something restless, like a storm waiting for the right moment to break. Inside the house, everything remained as controlled as always. But control like glass could crack under pressure. Nsikan Isaac stood near the wide living room window, his eyes fixed on the rain as it began to fall in slow, deliberate drops. His phone rested untouched in his hand. Meetings had been postponed, calls delayed. He didn't say it aloud, but his focus had shifted. Not to business, to something unfamiliar. Upstairs, to a room where silence had begun to change. He had not spoken directly to Amara since she arrived. He had not asked questions, had not interfered, but he had watched, carefully, because patterns mattered to him, and Amara's presence had disrupted one. Tunde was eating more, sleeping better, reacting less violently. Small improvements, yes, but in a life where nothing had changed for 6 years, small was not small. Still, Nsikan resisted drawing conclusions, because hope in his experience was dangerous. Upstairs, Amara sat cross-legged on the floor, her back against the bed. Tunde sat across from her, closer than he had ever been. Between them lay a small arrangement of objects: the cloth doll, the paper bird, a smooth stone, and a piece of thread tied into a loop. Amara had brought them one by one over the past few days. Now they formed something like a quiet language, not spoken, but shared. She didn't speak much that evening. The air felt different, heavier. Tunde seemed more alert than usual, his eyes flickering occasionally toward the window, his body slightly tense. Amara noticed. She always noticed. "Storms can be loud," she said softly, not looking at him directly. No response. "They used to scare my brother," she continued. "He would think the sky was breaking." A pause. "But then I told him, it's just the clouds arguing." Another pause. "And they always stop." The first crack of thunder came just then. Sharp. Sudden. Tunde flinched violently. His shoulders shot up, his hands instinctively moving toward his ears. His breathing changed immediately. Fast. Shallow. Amara didn't rush. She didn't reach out. Instead, she shifted slightly, lowering her voice further. "It's okay," she whispered. "It will pass." Another thunderclap. Closer. Louder. Tunde's body reacted stronger this time. His fingers pressed tightly against his ears, his eyes wide, not just with fear, but with memory. Because the sound wasn't just noise, it was a doorway. The crash of something breaking. A scream. A voice raised in anger. A door slamming. Tunde didn't see it clearly. He never did. But he felt it. Over and over again. Amara watched carefully. She knew this wasn't just about the storm. This was deeper, rooted. She slowly picked up the cloth doll and placed it near him. No words, just presence. Tunde's breathing remained uneven. His body curled slightly inward. The storm outside grew louder, the rain now hitting the windows in steady waves. And then a louder crack, lightning, thunder following immediately. Tunde let out a sharp, broken sound. Not a word, but close, too close. His body shook. This time, Amara moved, not quickly, but deliberately. She shifted closer just a little, still not touching, still giving space, but reducing the distance. "You're not there," she said softly. "You're here." Her voice was steady, anchored. "This is now." Another flash of lightning. The room flickered. Tunde's breathing spiked again. His hands trembled, and without thinking, without planning, he reached out. His fingers caught the edge of Amara's dress, lightly, barely there, but real. Amara froze for a fraction of a second, not out of fear, but out of awareness, because this moment mattered. She didn't react suddenly, didn't pull away. She simply stayed, allowing the contact, accepting it, without making it bigger than it was. "It's okay," she whispered again. Tunde's grip tightened slightly, not strong, but intentional. His breathing began to slow, not fully, but enough. The storm outside continued, but inside, something shifted. From the hallway, Nsikan stood still. He had come up quietly when the storm began, not to intervene, just to check. But now through the slightly open door he saw something he hadn't seen in years. His son reaching for someone. Not in panic, not in desperation, but in trust. Nsikan's chest tightened, not with pain, but with something unfamiliar. Something uncomfortable, because this was something he had not been able to give. No matter how much he tried, no matter how much he provided. And yet, this girl, this stranger from a world he barely understood, had done it without force, without authority, without demand, just by being there. He didn't step inside, didn't interrupt, he simply watched. Because for the first time, he wasn't in control of the outcome, and strangely, that felt necessary. Back inside the room, the storm slowly began to fade. The thunder grew distant. The rain softened. Tunde's grip on Amara's dress loosened. But he didn't pull away completely. He remained close, his breathing steadying, his body no longer rigid. Amara didn't move, didn't speak. She simply allowed the silence to settle. Not the empty silence of before, but a different kind, one that held something within it. After a long while, Tunde shifted, slowly, carefully. His hand moved away from her dress, but instead of retreating completely, he placed his hand on the floor, closer to her than ever before, almost touching. Amara glanced at it briefly, then looked away, giving him space, respecting the moment, because trust once given could be taken back just as easily. Later that night, Mama Sadi found Nsikan standing in the hallway, still, quiet. "You saw?" she asked softly. Nsikan didn't answer immediately. "Yes," he said finally. Mama Sad nodded. "She is helping him." Nsikan's jaw tightened slightly. "I don't understand how." Mama Sad smiled faintly. "Not everything that heals can be measured, sir." He didn't respond, but her words stayed with him, because they challenged something fundamental, his belief in control, in logic, in systems. And for the first time in a long time, Nsikan Isaac found himself facing something he couldn't calculate. Downstairs, Auntie Mareniki stood near the staircase, her eyes fixed upward. She had heard the storm, heard the movement, felt the shift, and she didn't like it, not one bit, because things were changing, and change meant risk. Her fingers tightened around the railing, her mind already moving, planning, because if that girl continued to gain influence over Tunde, then sooner or later she would gain influence over everything else. And that was something Mareniki would never allow. Back in his room, Tunde lay in bed. The storm had passed. The air was quiet again. But something inside him was no longer the same. He turned slightly, his eyes open in the dark, not afraid, not restless, just awake. And somewhere deep inside the silence that had held him captive for so long, a crack had formed, small, invisible, but real. And through that crack, something was beginning to rise. Not yet a voice, but something close, something waiting, something coming back. In houses built on power, secrets rarely stay buried. They are protected, guarded, hidden beneath layers of control, silence, and fear. But when something begins to shift, when control starts to slip, those secrets find their way back to the surface. Auntie Mareniki did not act impulsively. She never had. Every decision she made was measured, deliberate, and wrapped in calm authority. But beneath that calm, there was urgency now, because something in the house had changed, and she did not trust change she could not control. That evening she sat in her private sitting room, the dim light casting long shadows against the walls. The air was cool, untouched by the humidity outside. Across from her sat Mr. Balogan. He adjusted his glasses nervously, his fingers tapping lightly against his briefcase. "You asked to see me, Ma," he said carefully. Mareniki didn't respond immediately. She poured tea slowly, her movements precise. "Then the girl," she said. Balogan stiffened slightly. "Which girl?" Her eyes lifted, sharp, unimpressed. "The one in this house who does not belong here." A pause. "Amara," he said. Mareniki nodded once. "She is becoming a problem." Balogan hesitated. "She is just a maid." "No," Mareniki corrected quietly. "She is becoming something else." Silence stretched. "She is gaining influence over the boy." Balogan leaned forward slightly. "And that concerns you?" Mareniki's lips curved faintly. "It should concern you." He froze. Because now he understood. This wasn't about discomfort. This was about risk. "The boy," Mareniki continued, her voice low, controlled, "has been silent for years. That silence has been convenient." Balogan swallowed. "Yes, Ma." "If he begins to speak," she paused, letting the implication settle, "there are things he may remember." The room felt colder, because they both knew what she meant. Years ago, Zainab Isaac had not been the quiet, distant wife people remembered her as. She had been observant, sharp, too sharp. She had noticed discrepancies in the company's accounts, funds that didn't align, transactions that disappeared, names that repeated too often. And when she started asking questions, she became a problem. "We handled that situation," Balogan said carefully. "Yes," Mareniki replied. "We did." Her tone was calm, too calm. "But children remember differently," she added. "Not clearly, not logically, but emotionally." Balogan shifted in his seat. "You think he saw something, I think he heard something," Mareniki said. And that was enough. Silence. "Then and now," she continued, "this girl is making him feel safe." The word again. Safe. Balogan exhaled slowly. "And you want that to stop." Mareniki placed her teacup down gently. "I want certainty." The plan formed quickly, not because it was rushed, but because it had been done before, in different ways, with different people. The method was simple: discredit, isolate, remove, and most importantly, make it believable. The next morning began like any other, quiet, controlled, routine. Amara entered Tunde's room with her usual calm presence, her small bag in hand. Tunde was already awake, sitting, waiting. He didn't look at her directly, but he didn't need to. His body had already learned her rhythm. Amara sat down in her usual place. "You're early today," she said softly. No response, but his fingers moved slightly toward the objects between them. The cloth doll, the paper bird, the thread loop. Amara smiled faintly, a quiet acknowledgement. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out something new. A small necklace, simple, not expensive, but meaningful. "This belonged to my mother," she said gently. "I used to wear it when I was scared." She placed it on the floor, between them. "I thought maybe it could stay here for a while." Tunde's eyes flickered toward it, brief, curious, then still again. Amara didn't push, she never did, but outside the room, someone was watching. One of the junior staff members stood quietly at the corner of the hallway, waiting, observing, not for curiosity, but for instruction. And when the moment came, he moved. Later that afternoon, the house shifted. Subtly at first, a whisper here, a glance there, then a voice, loud, sharp, breaking the calm. "Who touched this?" It was Morinike. Her voice echoed through the main hall, drawing attention instantly. Staff gathered quickly, their faces tense. "What happened?" Mama Sare asked, stepping forward. Morinike stood near the display cabinet in the living room, empty, one item missing. A gold necklace, delicate, recognizable. Zainab's. "It was here this morning," Morinike said coldly, "and now it's gone." Silence fell, heavy, uncomfortable. Her eyes scanned the room, then stopped on Amara. "Search her," she said. The words were quiet, but final. Amara's heart dropped. What she asked softly. "Search her," Morinike repeated. Two staff members stepped forward hesitantly. Mama Sadie moved quickly. "Ma, please do it. No room for argument. No space for defense." Amara stood still, her mind racing, her hands cold. "I didn't take anything," she said, her voice steady but her chest tightening. No one responded, because in that moment, truth didn't matter, procedure did. The search was quick, efficient, and then a pause. One of the staff members froze, his hand inside Amara's bag. He slowly pulled something out, gold, shining, unmistakable, the necklace, Zainab's necklace. The room went completely silent. Amara stared at it, her mind refusing to process what her eyes were seeing. "No," she whispered. "That's not how convenient," Morinike said calmly. Amara shook her head. "I didn't. I swear I didn't." "You expect us to believe that," Morinike interrupted. Her tone wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The evidence was already in the air, visible, undeniable. "I didn't take it," Amara repeated, her voice breaking slightly now. "Someone put it there." Morinike raised an eyebrow. "Of course." A few staff members exchanged glances. Not accusing, not supportive, just uncertain. Because doubt spreads quickly, even when it shouldn't. From the staircase, Nsikan appeared. His presence alone shifted the room. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. Morinike turned to him. "The maid," she said simply. "She's been stealing." She gestured toward the necklace. Nsikan's eyes moved to it, then to Amara, then back again. "Is this true?" he asked. Amara stepped forward slightly. "No, sir. I would never." "It was in her bag," Morinike added. Silence, heavy. Nsikan didn't speak immediately. His gaze lingered on Amara, searching, measuring. But what he saw, he couldn't define. Fear, yes, but also something else, something that didn't match guilt. Still, evidence was evidence. "Pack your things," he said finally. The words were quiet, but final. Amara felt something inside her collapse. "Sir, please." "This house does not tolerate theft." Her throat tightened, her hands trembled, but she didn't beg again, because something deeper than fear had already settled in, understanding, that in places like this, truth didn't always win. Upstairs, Tunde stood in the doorway of his room, watching, not fully understanding, but feeling the tension, the shift, the loss. His eyes followed Amara as she was led away, his body stiff, his breath uneven. And as the front door opened, as the rain began to fall again, as the one person who made the silence feel safe walked out, something inside him broke. And this time, it didn't stay quiet. The moment Amara stepped out of the Isaac mansion, the rain swallowed her. Not gently, not softly, but with a cold, relentless force that blurred everything, her vision, her thoughts, her sense of direction. Behind her, the gates closed, slowly, deliberately, like a final decision. Inside those gates, her voice no longer mattered. Her truth had been dismissed, her presence erased, and yet the weight she carried did not stay behind. It followed her, heavy, unforgiving. Amara didn't run. She didn't scream. She didn't even cry immediately. She just walked, step after step. The rain soaking through her clothes, clinging to her skin, turning the ground beneath her into something slippery and uncertain. Her mind replayed the moment over and over again. The necklace, the accusation, the silence, and in Nsikan's voice, "Pack your things." It echoed louder than the thunder, because it carried something deeper than rejection. It carried finality. By the time she reached the bus stop, her body felt numb. People moved around her, some rushing to avoid the rain, others huddled under small shelters, their conversations blending into background noise. But Amara heard none of it. She stood still, soaked, empty. Her hands clenched tightly at her sides, because if she loosened them, she might fall apart. Back at the mansion, something was very wrong. It didn't start with a scream or a loud cry. It started with silence. A different kind of silence. The kind that feels unstable. Mama Sade noticed it first. She had gone upstairs to check on Tunde after the commotion. But when she reached his room, he wasn't there. Her heart skipped. "Tunde," she called softly. No response. She stepped inside. The room was empty. The doll lay on the floor, the paper bird crushed slightly at the edge of the bed. Something had been disturbed. Something had broken. "Tunde," she called again, louder this time. Still nothing. A cold wave of fear moved through her chest. She turned quickly and rushed into the hallway. "Tunde is not in his room," she said urgently as she reached the main hall. Nsikan turned immediately. "What do you mean, not in his room?" "He's gone." The words landed heavily. Mareniki frowned. "That's impossible. The gates." "He's inside the house." Nsikan cut in sharply. "Search every room." Staff scattered instantly. Doors opened. Voices called. Footsteps echoed through the halls. But something in Nsikan's chest told him. This wasn't just wandering. This was reaction. They found him near the back of the house, collapsed, curled tightly against the wall near the service exit, his body trembling violently, his hands pressed hard against his ears, his breathing erratic. Tunde Mama Sade rushed to him, dropping to her knees. He didn't respond, didn't look up, didn't move toward her. It was worse than before, much worse. "Call the doctor," Nsikan ordered immediately. But even as he said it, he knew this wasn't something medicine could fix. Tunde's body shook uncontrollably. His breaths came in sharp, broken gasps. His eyes were open but not seeing. He was somewhere else, trapped again. The sound of voices, sharp, accusing, a woman crying, footsteps, a door closing, the feeling of something being taken away, something safe, something important. "Make it stop," Mama Sade whispered desperately, her hands hovering near him, but not touching. She had seen his episodes before, but never like this. Never this deep, never this shattered. Nsikan stood frozen for a moment, watching, processing, failing, because nothing he had ever used to fix problems applied here. "Tunde," he said, stepping closer. No response. He crouched down, closer. "Tunde, look at me." Nothing. His son's world had closed again, locked, sealed. The doctor arrived quickly, checked his pulse, his breathing, his reactions. "He's in acute distress," the doctor said. "We need to take him to the hospital." No, Nsikan replied immediately. The word came too fast, too firm. The doctor looked at him. "Sir." No, Nsikan repeated, his voice lower now. "Hospitals don't help him. They never have." The doctor hesitated, because he didn't have a better answer. Mama Sade looked up slowly. Her eyes filled with something deeper than fear, understanding. "He's not reacting to the accusation," she said softly. Nsikan turned to her. "He's reacting to her leaving." The words settled into the room, heavy, unavoidable. Nsikan's chest tightened. "No," he said quietly. But the denial didn't hold, because he had seen it, the connection, The change, the way Tunde reached for her, and now the way he was breaking without her. "Bring her back," Mama Sadie said. Nsikan didn't respond. "Sir," she continued, her voice steady but urgent, "if you want him to come out of this, you need to bring her back." Morenike stepped forward. "That is not necessary," she said sharply. "We will handle this properly." "This is not about handling," Mama Sadie interrupted. The room fell silent, because she had never spoken like that before. Not to Morenike, not to anyone. "This is about the boy," she said firmly. "And right now, the only thing he is reaching for is gone." Nsikan's mind raced. Logic, evidence, control, all clashing with something else, something he didn't trust. Instinct. "Find her," he said suddenly. The decision landed like a shift in gravity. Morenike's eyes narrowed. "You can't be serious." Nsikan stood up slowly, his expression hardening. "For once," he said quietly, "this is not about what we can or cannot do." He turned toward the staff. "Send drivers, check the main roads, bus stops, anywhere near here." His voice carried authority now, unquestioned, unchallenged. "Find her." Outside, the rain had slowed, but the world still felt heavy. Amara sat under a small broken shelter near the roadside, her clothes damp, her body still, her mind elsewhere. She hadn't gone home yet. She couldn't. Not like this, not with empty hands, not with no answers. Her phone rested in her lap, silent, until it vibrated. She looked down slowly. An unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. Hello, a pause. Then, "Miss Okoye, this is Mama Sadie." Amara's breath caught. "I'm so sorry," Mama Sadie said quickly, "but you need to come back." Amara closed her eyes. "I can't," she whispered. "They made their decision. This is not about them," Mama Sadie said. "It's about Tunde." Silence. "Then what happened?" Mama Sadie's voice softened. "He collapsed. He's not responding. And he won't come back." Amara's chest tightened. "He needs you." The words hit differently this time, not as an invitation, but as a responsibility. Amara looked down at her hands, still empty, still shaking, but now holding something else, a choice. Back at the mansion, Tunde's body had not calmed. If anything, it had worsened, his breathing more uneven, his movements more erratic. Nsikan stood nearby, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on his son, waiting for something, anything, because for the first time in years, he was completely out of answers. And somewhere on a quiet road, under a fading storm, a girl who had lost everything that day was about to decide whether she would come back. Hospitals had never helped Tunde Isaac. They had bright lights, controlled temperatures, precise instruments, and yet none of it could reach the place where his silence lived. Over the years, Nsikan had taken his son to specialists across Lagos, even abroad. Neurologists, child psychologists, trauma experts. Each one offered explanations. None offered answers. So when the doctor suggested taking Tunde to the hospital again, Nsikan refused, not out of pride, but out of experience. Still, watching his son now curled against the floor, trembling, as if his body could no longer hold itself together, something inside him began to crack. Because this time, it was worse. Far worse. Tunde had not calmed, not even slightly. Minutes stretched into something heavier, something suffocating. His small body shook in uneven waves, his breath coming in sharp, broken gasps. His fingers pressed so tightly against his ears that his knuckles turned pale. And yet, it wasn't the noise he was trying to block anymore. It was the absence of something that had become safe. "Sir, we can sedate him," the doctor said cautiously, kneeling nearby. Nsikan didn't respond immediately. Sedation. A temporary solution. A way to silence the body. But not the cause. He had done it before. And every time Tunde woke up the same, silent, distant, unreachable. No Nsikan said finally. The doctor hesitated. Sir, his condition. No Nsikan repeated more firmly this time, because deep down, he knew. This was not something medicine could fix. This was something emotional, something broken that had just begun to heal and had now been torn open again. Mama Sadie stood nearby, her hands clasped tightly together. She will come, she whispered softly. Nsikan turned slightly. You're certain? Her eyes met his. No, she said honestly, but I believe she will. Belief, another thing Nsikan wasn't used to relying on, but right now, it was all he had. Upstairs, Auntie Mariniki stood alone in the hallway, listening, not with concern, but with calculation. She had not expected this. The reaction, the intensity, the way the boy had broken so completely. Her plan had been simple: remove the girl, restore order, maintain control, but now the house was anything but controlled. Her jaw tightened, because chaos was dangerous, not just for the boy, but for everything else. If this continued, if Nsikan started questioning things, if attention shifted to the past, then no, she wouldn't allow it. Back downstairs, time moved slowly, heavy, uncertain. Tunde's condition had not improved. If anything, his breathing had grown more erratic, his body weaker from the strain. Nsikan knelt beside him again. This time he didn't speak immediately. He simply watched, studied, trying to understand something he had avoided for years, what his son needed, not as a problem, but as a person. Tunde, he said quietly. No response. His voice softened. I know you can hear me. Still nothing. But Nsikan didn't stop. I don't know what you're feeling, he admitted. The words felt unfamiliar in his mouth, uncomfortable but necessary. I don't know how to fix it. His hand hovered slightly above Tunde's shoulder, not touching, not forcing, just there. But I'm trying. Silence. Then something small, almost invisible. Tunde's fingers twitched, not reaching, not responding, but reacting. Nsikan saw it, and for the first time, he didn't ignore it. Outside the mansion, the rain had stopped completely. The air was still, quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after something heavy has passed, but left its mark behind. Amara stood at the gate. Her clothes had dried unevenly, her scarf slightly loosened from the wind. Her eyes were tired, but steady. She had not rushed back. She had walked, step by step, not because she didn't care, but because she needed to think, to choose, because returning meant something. It meant stepping back into a place that had rejected her, accused her, humiliated her, but it also meant something else. Tunde, the boy who had never spoken, the boy who had reached for her, the boy who was now breaking. Amara closed her eyes briefly, then opened them, and knocked. The gate opened quickly this time, no hesitation, no questions, because inside urgency had replaced protocol. Mama Sadie was already waiting at the entrance. Relief flooded her face the moment she saw Amara. Thank you, she said softly. Amara didn't respond, not out of coldness, but because her focus was already elsewhere. Where is he? Inside. They moved quickly, through the hallway, past the polished floors, past the silence that now felt heavier than before. When Amara stepped into the room, everything stopped. Not physically, but emotionally. The space shifted. Tunde was still on the floor, still trembling, still lost. Nsikan stood nearby, watching, waiting. And when he saw her, something in his expression changed. Not relief, not fully, but something close. He stepped aside, without a word, because in that moment, he understood. This was not his place. Amara didn't rush. She didn't panic. She didn't react to the chaos. She simply walked forward, slowly, deliberately, and lowered herself to the floor. The same place, the same distance, the same presence. "Tunde," she said softly. No response, but the room held its breath, because this moment mattered. More than anything else, Amara didn't reach for him, didn't touch him. She just sat, grounded, calm. "You're okay," she whispered. Her voice was steady, familiar, safe. Tunde's breathing didn't stop immediately, but it shifted, slightly, barely noticeable but real. Amara continued, "I'm here." Another pause. Then slowly, very slowly, Tunde's fingers moved, not toward his ears, but downward, away. His hands loosened, his breathing softened, not fully, but enough. Enough to break the cycle. Mama Sadi covered her mouth again. Nsikan didn't move, didn't speak, because what he was witnessing could not be explained. Amara reached for the cloth doll, placed it gently near him. "Look," she whispered. "Ada is here." Tunde's eyes flickered, just for a second, then they settled, on the doll. His breathing slowed further, his body relaxed slightly, and then something even smaller, but even more important. He shifted, closer, not fully, but enough to show he was coming back. Minutes passed, slow, quiet, fragile, and in those minutes, the storm inside him began to settle, not disappear, but calm, because the one thing he had been reaching for was no longer gone. Across the room, Nsikan stood still, watching, processing, understanding, because now there was no denying it, no explaining it away, no controlling it. His son needed her, not as a servant, not as a temporary presence, but as something else, something deeper. And that realization changed everything. Later that night, as the house slowly returned to silence, a new tension settled in, not chaotic, not loud, but heavy. Because decisions had been made without being spoken, and consequences were already forming. In her room, Amara sat quietly on the edge of the bed, her hands resting in her lap, her mind still, not empty, but focused, because she knew returning was only the beginning. The accusation still stood, the truth still hidden. And somewhere in this house, someone was watching, waiting, planning. Upstairs, Auntie Mariniki stood in the shadows of the hallway once more, her eyes fixed on the closed door of Tunde's room, her expression unreadable, but her thoughts sharp, because this was no longer just about removing a maid. This was about something bigger, something more dangerous, control, and it was slipping. Inside the room, Tunde lay in bed, calm, still, his breathing steady for the first time in hours, his hand resting loosely near the edge of the mattress. And though he hadn't spoken, not yet, something inside him had shifted again, stronger this time, closer to the surface, closer to breaking through, because somewhere deep within the silence, the memory was waking, and soon it would no longer stay hidden. The distance between wealth and poverty in Lagos could be measured in minutes. A short drive, a single turn, a change in air and sound in expectation. For Nsikan Isaac, it was a distance he rarely crossed, not because he couldn't, but because he never needed to, until now. The morning after Amara returned, the mansion felt different, quieter, not with emptiness, but with awareness. Every movement seemed watched, every decision weighed. Tunde had stabilized through the night. He slept longer than usual, his breathing, even his body, no longer trapped in the violent tremors of the day before. And Amara had stayed, not because anyone ordered her to, but because she chose to. She sat beside his bed until dawn, her presence steady, her silence meaningful. And for the first time in years, Tunde did not wake in fear. Nsikan stood outside the room watching through the slightly open door. He had not slept, not fully. His mind had been too occupied with what he had seen, with what he had ignored for years, with what he could no longer deny. Mama Sadi approached quietly. "He's better," she said softly. Nsikan nodded. "Yes." A pause. "She stayed all night," Mama Sadi added. "I know." Another pause. "Then you need to speak to her," Mama Sadi said. Nsikan didn't respond immediately, because speaking to her meant acknowledging. Acknowledging meant changing, and change required letting go of control. Still he stepped forward, opened the door, and entered. Amara looked up as he approached. She didn't stand immediately. She didn't rush. She simply met his gaze, respectfully, but without fear. Nsikan stopped a few steps away. For a moment, neither of them spoke, because this was not a simple conversation. It carried weight, consequences, unspoken truths. "You came back," Nsikan said finally. His voice was calm, but not cold. Amara nodded slightly. "He needed me." The answer was simple, but it carried something deeper, Nsikan noticed. "You understand the situation you're in," he said. Amara held his gaze. "I understand what I did not do." Silence, not tense but firm. Nsikan studied her, not as a suspect, not as a servant, but as something else, something he was still trying to define. "Stay," he said. The word was quiet, but decisive. Amara blinked slightly. "Sir, this is not about the accusation," he continued. "Not right now." A pause. "This is about him." His eyes moved briefly toward Tunde, still sleeping, still calm. Amara followed his gaze, then nodded. "I will stay. Not for the house, not for the job, but for the boy." Later that day, Nsikan did something he had not done in years. He left the mansion with intention. The car moved through the city, leaving behind the clean roads and controlled environments of Ikoyi, entering areas Nsikan had only seen from a distance. Traffic thickened. Noise increased. The air changed, less filtered, more real. He sat in the back seat silent, his eyes scanning everything, because this time he was not passing through. He was looking, searching, understanding. Ajagunal did not welcome him, not with hostility, but with indifference, because men like Nsikan did not belong there, and people there had learned not to expect anything from men like him. The car stopped at the entrance of a narrow street. The driver hesitated. "Sir, this is as far as we can go." Nsikan nodded. "I'll walk." The driver looked surprised, but said nothing. The street was uneven, crowded, alive. Children ran past him laughing barefoot. Women balanced goods on their heads. Men sat on wooden benches, watching, talking, surviving. Nsikan walked carefully, his polished shoes out of place against the dusty ground. But he didn't turn back, because this mattered. More than comfort, more than image. He found the place easily, not because it stood out, but because it didn't. A small shack, worn, fragile, but lived in. He paused at the entrance, then knocked. The door opened slowly. A young boy stood there, thin, pale, eyes tired beyond his age. "Chinedu?" "Yes," he asked weakly. Nsikan looked at him, took in the details, the signs, the struggle. "Is Amara here?" he asked. Chinedu shook his head. "She went to work." Work. The word carried weight, even here. Nsikan nodded slowly. "Can I come in?" Chinedu hesitated, then stepped aside. Inside, the space was small, simple, everything visible, nothing hidden. A mattress on the floor, a small table, a plastic container, empty. Nsikan noticed everything, because now it meant something. "You're her brother," Nsikan said. Chinedu nodded. "Are you sick?" A simple question, but direct. Chinedu hesitated. Then, "Yes?" Nsikan crouched slightly, bringing himself closer to the boy's level. When was the last time you saw a doctor? Chinedu looked down. I don't remember. Silence. Then she said she would find a way. He added quietly. Nsikan felt something tighten in his chest because he believed that. Not as a statement, but as truth. Outside voices called. Children laughed. Life continued. But inside that small room, something shifted. Because for the first time, Nsikan Isaac saw the full picture. Not just Amara, not just Tunde, but the connection between them, the shared understanding of struggle, of fear, of responsibility. You need treatment, Nsikan said finally. Chinedu looked up, hope flickering, but cautious. Can you help? The question was simple, but heavy, because it wasn't just about money. It was about trust. Nsikan paused, then nodded, yes. No conditions, no hesitation, just a decision. Back at the mansion, Amara sat with Tunde once again. The room was quiet, calm, familiar. Tunde sat closer now, not touching, but near. His fingers moved slowly across the floor, tracing, remembering, processing. Amara watched, not interrupting, not guiding, just present. Because she knew something was coming, not immediately, not easily, but soon. Down the hallway, Auntie Maranagi stood still, watching, always watching. Her eyes narrowed slightly because she could feel it, the shift, the direction, the danger, and she knew time was running out. That evening, Nsikan returned, not as the man who had left, but as someone changed. He walked through the house with quiet purpose, his mind clearer, his decisions forming, because now he had seen both sides, and he understood something he had avoided for too long. Truth does not always live where power resides. Sometimes it lives in the places no one wants to look. Upstairs, Tunde sat by the window, the light fading slowly, his hand resting near the edge of the floor, closer than before, his breathing steady, his body calm, and somewhere deep inside, the silence was shifting again, stronger, closer, because the pieces were coming together, the past, the present, the truth, and soon they would no longer stay separate. Soon they would collide. The closer the truth moves to the surface, the more violently it is pushed back down. Inside the Isaac mansion, everything still looked the same. Polished floors, quiet hallways, controlled voices. But beneath that calm tension had thickened into something almost tangible. Because too many things were beginning to connect, too many questions were forming. And for someone like Auntie Maranaki, questions were dangerous. Amara felt it the moment she woke up that morning. Not fear, not exactly, but awareness. The kind that settles quietly under your skin, telling you something is not right. She had slept lightly, her body still adjusting to the weight of everything that had happened, the accusation, her return, Tunde's collapse, and the strange shift in Nsikan's behavior. Now, as she walked down the hallway toward Tunde's room, she noticed the subtle changes. Staff who avoided eye contact, whispers that stopped when she passed, doors that seemed to close just a second too quickly. She didn't react. She had lived through worse, but she remembered. Inside the room, Tunde was already awake, sitting by the window, waiting. He didn't turn immediately when she entered, but his body shifted, just slightly, toward her. Amara noticed, and something warm, quiet, steady moved through her chest. She sat in her usual place, not too close, not too far, the same rhythm, the same presence. "You slept well?" she said softly. Not a question, a statement. Tunde's fingers moved slowly across the floor, tracing, thinking, remembering. Amara watched, because the movement had changed. Before it was random. Now it felt intentional. Patterns, shapes, fragments of something trying to form. She leaned forward slightly, not interrupting, just observing. "What do you see?" she whispered. Tunde didn't respond, but his hand paused, then moved again, this time slower, more deliberate. Amara's eyes followed the movement, a line, a curve, another line. It wasn't clear, not yet, but it wasn't empty either. It was something. Outside the room, Morenike stood in silence, watching, her expression calm, but her thoughts sharp, because she had noticed it too. The boy's movements, the way he was no longer just reacting but remembering. And that gap was a problem. She turned and walked away, not rushed, not hurried, because panic was not her style. Control was, and control required precision. Later that afternoon, the opportunity came, not planned, but perfect. Mama Sadi had been called away to handle a delivery at the back of the house. Most of the staff were occupied in the kitchen. The hallway outside Tunde's room was quiet, too quiet. And Morenike moved. She entered the room without knocking. Amara stood up immediately. Yes, Ma. Morenike didn't respond to her. Her attention was on Tunde. He had stiffened the moment she entered, not into panic, but into alertness. His body recognized something it didn't trust. Morenike walked slowly across the room, her steps measured, controlled. Then she stopped near a cabinet, opened it, and reached inside. Amara watched carefully, her instincts rising. "What are you looking for, Mia?" she asked cautiously. Morenike didn't answer. She simply removed a small object, a box, old, dark, locked. She held it for a moment, then turned. And for a brief second, her eyes met Tunde's. Something passed between them. Not words, not understanding, but recognition. Tunde's body reacted instantly. His fingers froze. His breathing changed. Subtle, but real. Amara noticed. "What is that?" she asked again. Morenike smiled faintly. "Something that does not concern you." She moved toward the door, but as she passed, she paused. Then deliberately she placed the box on a nearby table, within Tunde's line of sight, and left. The room fell silent again, but not the same silence as before. This one was heavier, charged. Tunde's eyes were fixed on the box, his body still, too still. Amara turned toward him. "Tunde." No response, but his breathing had changed again, faster, uneven. His hand twitched slightly, then stopped. Amara followed his gaze. The box, old, locked, but not forgotten. She felt it. Something about it. Something important. Slowly, carefully, she reached out, not toward Tunde, but toward the box. Her fingers hovered over it, then stopped, because this wasn't hers. This wasn't something to open without understanding, but Tunde's reaction, it wasn't random. It was memory. "Tunde," she whispered. His eyes didn't move, still locked, still trapped. "What is it?" Silence. Then his hand moved, slowly, painfully, as if pushing through something heavy. It lifted, barely, and pointed, not fully extended, but clear, toward the box. Amara's breath caught, because this was not just reaction, this was communication. His finger trembled, his body tensed, his breathing quickened, but he didn't stop. He pointed again, stronger this time, more urgent, his eyes wide, not with fear, but with something deeper, desperation. Amara's heart began to race. "What's inside?" she whispered. No answer, but his hand moved again, now shaking, now struggling, trying to do something more, to say something. But the words, they weren't there. Not yet. His mouth opened slightly, a breath, a sound, but nothing formed. His throat tightened. His body reacted. The tension building, too fast, too strong. Amara saw it immediately. No, it's okay," she said softly. She shifted closer, not touching, but grounding. "You don't have to force it. But Tunde's body didn't listen, because something inside him had been triggered, something old, something buried. The box, the voices, the night, the memory, a crash, a scream, a voice raised in anger, a woman crying, footsteps, a door slamming. And the box Tunde's body shook. His breathing broke again. But this time, it wasn't just fear. It was something else, something pushing forward, something trying to escape. Amara reached for the cloth doll, placed it beside him. "It's okay," she whispered, but her eyes stayed on the box, because she understood now. This wasn't random. This was connected to everything. Outside the room, Mariniki stood still, listening, waiting, because this was what she needed. Confirmation that the boy remembered something, that the risk was real, and that she had to act. Soon, inside Tunde's body slowly began to calm again. Not completely, but enough. Enough to stop the spiral. Amara stayed close, present, grounded, her mind racing, her heart steady, because now everything had changed. The accusation, the past, the silence, it was all connected. And the key was sitting on that table, locked, waiting. That night the mansion felt different again, not just tense, but expectant, because something had been uncovered, not fully, not clearly, but enough to shift the direction. In his study, Nsikan sat alone, the room dim, the air still. He had received confirmation. Chinedu's surgery could be arranged immediately, no delay, no risk, and yet his mind wasn't on that. It was on something else, something closer, something inside his own house, because for the first time, he felt it, the presence of something hidden, something unresolved, something waiting to be exposed. Upstairs, Tunde lay in bed, his body still, but his mind not quiet, not anymore, because the memory had moved from deep inside, closer to the surface, closer to breaking through, and soon, very soon, silence would no longer be enough to contain it. Truth does not arrive all at once. It comes in fragments, in gestures, in broken attempts, in moments that don't yet make sense until they do. That night, the Isaac mansion did not sleep, not fully. Even though the lights dimmed and the doors closed, something restless moved through the walls, an unspoken awareness that things were no longer under control. Amara felt it, Nsikan felt it, and most of all, Tunde carried it. He woke before dawn, not with fear, not with panic, but with a strange, heavy stillness, the kind that comes when something long buried begins to rise. He sat up slowly in bed, his eyes open but distant. The room was quiet, familiar, but something inside him wasn't. His hand moved automatically downward toward the edge of the bed, toward the floor, toward where something had been. The box. His fingers tightened slightly. His breathing changed. Not fast, not broken, but tense, as if his body knew before his mind did. Across the room, Amara stirred. She had slept lightly again, her body attuned to every small shift in his breathing. She opened her eyes slowly and saw him sitting there, still, focused, not lost, not completely, but not fully present either. "Tunde," she whispered. He didn't respond, but he didn't pull away. That alone was enough for her to move. She sat up slowly, careful, measured, and lowered herself to the floor, the same place, the same rhythm, consistency. She followed his gaze, the table, the box, still there, still untouched, but no longer just an object. Now, it was something else, a trigger, a memory, a key. "What is it?" she asked softly. No response, but his fingers moved, slow, deliberate, tracing something on the floor again. Amara leaned forward slightly, watching. This time, the pattern was clearer. A line, a circle, a shape. She frowned slightly, trying to understand. Then it clicked. A necklace. Her breath caught. She looked up at the box again, then back at him. "You remember something," she said gently. Not a question, a realization. Tunde's hand paused, then moved again. Faster this time, more urgent. The shapes less controlled, more emotional. Amara felt it, the pressure building, the need to express something that didn't yet have words. She leaned closer. "You can show me," she whispered. "You don't have to say it." His breathing changed, slightly faster. His body tensed, but he didn't stop. He kept tracing, over and over, the same shape, the same movement, until his hand lifted and pointed toward the box. Amara's chest tightened, because now there was no doubt. This was connected, directly. She stood slowly, walked toward the table, and stopped. Her hand hovered over the box again. Then she pulled back, because this wasn't just about curiosity anymore. This was about truth, and truth had consequences. Behind her, Tunde made a sound, small, broken, but clear. She turned immediately. He was trying, his mouth slightly open, his throat tight, his body resisting but pushing, trying to force something out. He whispered. The sound was faint, almost lost, but real. Amara froze, not in shock, but in awareness, because this moment, this was everything. "Tunde," she said softly. He tried again, his face strained, his body trembling slightly. The sound broke, fell apart. His throat closed again. Frustration flickered across his face. Not loud, not dramatic, but deep. Amara moved closer, still not touching. "You're okay," she whispered. "You don't have to rush." But his body didn't listen, because something inside him was pushing too hard, too fast. Years of silence, breaking at once. He pointed again, more urgently now. The box, the floor, the invisible shapes, his breathing uneven, his body shaking, trying to connect everything, trying to make it understood. Amara looked at him, then at the box, then back again. And this time, she made a decision. She walked to the table, picked up the box, and brought it closer, placing it on the floor between them. Tunde's eyes locked onto it instantly, his body stiff, his breath shallow. But he didn't retreat. Not this time. Amara looked at the lock, old, worn, not secure, not meant to be hidden forever. She hesitated, just for a second. Then she opened it. Inside was not money, not documents, not something ordinary. It was a necklace, gold, delicate, familiar. Amara's breath caught, because she recognized it, not from memory, but from something recent. The accusation, the one she had been blamed for stealing. But that wasn't all. Beneath the necklace, there were papers, folded, a photograph, old, faded. She picked it up slowly, looked at it, and everything shifted. Zainab, standing in the living room, holding the same necklace. But she wasn't alone. In the background, two figures, blurry but recognizable, Moreniki and Balogan, standing near the cabinet, arguing. Amara's heart began to race. She looked at the papers, opened them, account records, transactions, signatures, names, numbers that didn't match, money that didn't belong. Her hands trembled slightly, because now the picture was forming. Behind her, Tunde made another sound, stronger this time. He struggled, his face tense, his throat tight, but he didn't stop. Amara turned quickly. "It's okay," she whispered, but her voice had changed. Not just calm now, focused, because she understood. This wasn't just memory, this was truth trying to break through. Tunde whispered. The word barely formed, but it was there, clear enough, real enough. Amara's eyes widened. "You saw them?" she asked softly. He nodded. Small, but certain. T took. He tried again. The sound broke. His body resisted, but the meaning, it was there. Amara looked down at the necklace, then at the papers, then back at him. They took it, she whispered. Another nod, stronger this time, more certain. Her heart pounded, because everything had just changed. The accusation, the past, the silence. It was all connected, and the truth was no longer hidden. Outside the room, a shadow moved, quiet, careful, listening. Morenik. She had heard enough, seen enough, and now she knew. The boy remembered, the girl understood, and the secret was no longer safe. Her jaw tightened, her mind sharpened, because now there was only one option left. Inside the room, Amara held the photograph tightly, her mind racing, her breath steady, because she knew what this meant, not just for her, but for everything. Tunde, she said softly. He looked at her, fully, for the first time, not through fear, not through confusion, but through something else, clarity. You're not alone anymore, she whispered, and for the first time in 6 years, that was true. Downstairs, Nsikan stood in his study, unaware, but not for long, because the truth was already on its way to him, and when it arrived, nothing in that house would ever be the same again. The truth does not whisper when it finally arrives. It stands, it demands to be seen, and in rooms built on silence, it breaks everything. The Isaac boardroom had never felt this heavy, not during mergers, not during losses, not even during the investigation that followed Zainab's death. But today, the air itself seemed to resist movement, because something was about to happen, something no one had prepared for. Nsikan Isaac stood at the head of the long table, his presence as commanding as ever. But inside, nothing felt the same. Because for the first time, this was not about business. This was personal, and personal was unpredictable. Around the table sat the board members, their expressions composed but uneasy. Mama Said stood quietly near the wall. Amara stood beside her, still, calm, but no longer invisible. And across the room, Auntie Moreniki sat with perfect posture, her face unreadable, her fingers resting lightly on the arm of her chair. Mr. Balogun sat beside her, silent, too silent. "Let's begin," Nsikan said. His voice was steady, controlled, but different, less distant, more deliberate. "We are here to address a matter that concerns both this company and this family." His eyes moved briefly to Amara, then back to the room. "There's been an accusation, a pause, of theft." Moreniki did not react. She simply listened, waiting, because she believed this would go as planned, that control would return, that the girl would be dismissed, that the truth would remain buried. Nsikan continued, "But before any conclusion is made, we will review new information." That word "new" shifted the room, subtly, but enough. Moreniki's eyes narrowed slightly. Amara Nsikan said. Amara stepped forward, her hands steady, her breath controlled. Not because she wasn't afraid, but because she had already faced worse. She placed the photograph on the table, then the papers, one by one, carefully, deliberately. "These were found in a box in Tunde's room," she said. Her voice was soft, but clear. "They belonged to the late Mrs. Zainab Isaac." A murmur moved through the room, quiet, uncertain. Nsikan leaned forward slightly, his eyes fixed on the photograph, then the documents. His expression didn't change, but something inside him did. "What exactly are we looking at?" one of the board members asked. Amara hesitated, then spoke. "These are financial records, transactions that do not match company accounts." She paused, then, "and this," she pointed to the photograph, "shows where the necklace was before it was reported missing." All eyes moved to the image, to the figures in the background, blurry but recognizable. Morenike didn't move, didn't react, because panic would be a mistake. These are serious accusations, another board member said. Where did you get this? Amara's voice didn't waver. From the room of the boy who saw everything. The room fell silent, because now the direction had changed. Morenike finally spoke, her tone calm, controlled. Are we now allowing servants to fabricate stories and present them as evidence? Her gaze moved to Amara, sharp, dismissing. This is inappropriate. But Nsikan didn't respond, not yet, because he was still looking at the photograph, still processing, still remembering. Tunde brought it to me, Amara said quietly, not loudly, not defensively, just truthfully. He pointed to it. He tried to speak. A pause. He remembers. That word changed everything. Remembers. Balogun shifted in his seat, almost imperceptibly, but enough. Morenike's expression hardened slightly. A child with severe trauma is not a reliable witness, she said. His mind is broken. The words were sharp, deliberate, cruel, and then a sound, soft, fragile, but unmistakable. Mom. The room froze. Every head turned. Every breath stopped. At the doorway, Tunde stood, small, unsteady, but present. His eyes locked on Amara. Not the room, not the tension, just her. Amara's breath caught, not because of the word, but because of what it meant. Tunde took a step forward, then another, his body slightly trembling, but moving, choosing. Mom, he said again, stronger this time, clearer. Gasps filled the room. Mama Sade covered her mouth, tears already forming. And Nsikan didn't move, couldn't, because the moment he had waited for 6 years was happening, and he was not ready for it. Tunde reached Amara, stopped beside her, his hand finding the edge of her dress, just like before. But this time, he didn't hide it. He turned, slowly, facing the room, his breathing uneven, his body tense, but his voice, it was there, broken, but real. He whispered. His throat tightened, his face strained, but he didn't stop. They took... The words came slowly, painfully, but each one landed. Morenike stood up. No, but Nsikan raised his hand, not loudly, not aggressively, but enough. Silence returned. Tunde pointed, his hand shaking, but clear, toward the photograph, toward the figures. He struggled, his voice breaking, but pushing through. Took it. His finger moved, toward Morenike. The room collapsed into stillness, because now there was no ambiguity. Balogun stood suddenly. This is absurd, sit down, Nsikan said. His voice was quiet, but final. Balogun froze, then slowly sat. Nsikan stepped forward, his eyes on Tunde. Not the board, not the evidence. His son. You saw it? He asked. Tunde nodded, small, but certain. Nsikan closed his eyes briefly, because everything he had ignored, everything he had dismissed, everything he had buried, was now standing in front of him, speaking. He turned, slowly, facing Morenike. Is it true? He asked. Morenike didn't answer immediately, because for the first time, she had no control. The room waited. The silence stretched. Then she exhaled, not in defeat, but in calculation. You don't understand what you're asking, she said, her voice still calm, still composed. I understand enough, Nsikan replied. Another pause. Then Balogun broke. I didn't mean he started, but it was too late, because once truth begins, it does not stop. Security was called. Documents were taken. Statements were recorded, and for the first time, the system that had protected them turned against them. Morenike didn't fight, didn't resist, because she knew the moment had passed. As she was led away, Her eyes met Amara's, not with hatred, but with something colder, recognition, because she had underestimated her. The room slowly emptied, the tension dissolving into something else, something quieter, something heavier. Amara knelt beside Tunde, her hand finally resting gently over his. "You did it," she whispered. Tunde looked at her, not afraid, not broken, but free. Across the room, Nsikan stood alone, watching, processing, understanding, because everything had changed. Not just the truth, not just the past, but the future. And for the first time in years, silence no longer ruled that house. It had been broken by a voice that refused to stay hidden. Justice does not always arrive with noise. Sometimes it comes quietly like a door opening after years of being locked. And when it does, everything inside begins to breathe again. The Isaac mansion did not feel the same after that day. It was still grand, still polished, still filled with everything money could provide. But something invisible had shifted, something essential, because for the first time in years, truth had been allowed to stay. The investigation moved quickly, too quickly for denial, too clearly for escape. The documents recovered from the box matched inconsistencies already buried deep within the company's financial history. Transactions were traced, signatures verified, accounts reopened, and piece by piece, the story that had been hidden behind power began to unravel. Auntie Mareniki and Mr. Balogun were formally charged, not just with financial fraud, but with manipulation, concealment, and the chain of events that had led to Zainab Isaac's death. It was no longer speculation. It was evidence. And for Nsikan, that truth carried weight far beyond the courtroom, because justice, while necessary, does not erase regret. In his study, Nsikan stood alone once again, but this time the silence around him was different. Not empty, not distant, but reflective. On his desk lay the photograph, Zainab, smiling, unaware of what was coming, unprotected. He stared at it longer than usual, then spoke. I should have listened. The words were quiet, but they carried years of realization, because he had seen the signs, the tension, the questions she asked, but he had chosen not to look deeper, not to disrupt the order he had built, and in doing so, he had lost her, and almost lost his son. A knock came at the door, soft, respectful. "Come in," he said. Amara stepped inside. She paused near the entrance, not out of fear, but out of habit, because for so long this had not been her space. Nsikan turned to her. For a moment neither of them spoke, because there were too many things between them, unspoken, unresolved. Finally, Chinedu's surgery has been scheduled, Nsikan said. Amara's breath caught slightly. She hadn't asked, she hadn't reminded him, but he had remembered. "Thank you," she said softly. Nsikan nodded, a pause. "Then, I owe you more than that." Amara shook her head gently. "No, sir." "Yes," he said quietly, not forceful, not defensive, just certain. "You came back when you didn't have to." He stepped closer. "You stood in a place that had already rejected you." Another pause. "And you stayed for him." His eyes softened slightly, something rare. "I don't know how to repay that." Amara met his gaze, for the first time, fully. "You don't have to repay it," she said. "I didn't do it for anything." A silence followed, but this one was different, because it carried understanding, not tension. Nsikan said again, not as an order, not as a condition, but as an invitation. Amara hesitated, not because she didn't want to, but because she understood what staying meant. This house, this life, this future. It was not simple, it was not easy, but it was possible. She nodded slowly. "I will stay. Later that afternoon, sunlight filled the living room, warm, gentle, unfiltered. Tunde sat on the floor, the same place he had sat for years. But he was not the same. The silence around him no longer felt like a barrier. It felt like space, space that was slowly being filled. Amara sat beside him, closer now, not distant, not careful, just there. The cloth doll rested between them, the paper bird beside it, familiar, grounding. Tunde's fingers moved slowly, tracing patterns again, but this time he stopped, looked at her, and spoke, soft, careful, but real. Mom. The word came easier now, less broken, more certain. Amara's eyes filled slightly, but she smiled, not because of the word, but because of what it meant. Trust, connection, healing. Across the room, Nsikan watched, not from a distance, not from behind a wall, but openly present, because this time he was not stepping away. Tunde turned toward him, his eyes steady, his voice still fragile, but growing. Dad. The word was small, but it landed deeply. Nsikan's breath caught. For a moment he didn't move, didn't speak, because this was the moment he thought might never come. He stepped forward slowly, then knelt, lowering himself, meeting his son at eye level. "I'm here," he said. And this time, he meant it. Tunde didn't pull away, didn't retreat. He simply stayed. And that was enough. Days passed. And with each one, the house changed. Not dramatically, not loudly, but steadily. Like something long frozen, beginning to thaw. Chinedu's surgery was successful. The recovery slow, but hopeful. And for the first time, Amara allowed herself to breathe. Not just survive. Nsikan adjusted too, not perfectly, not instantly, but intentionally. He listened more, spoke less, stayed present, because he understood now. That control could not replace connection. And Tunde, he spoke. Not always, not easily, but more. Each word a step, each sentence a victory. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the city, the three of them sat together in the garden. Quiet, peaceful, real. Tunde leaned slightly against Amara, his hand resting loosely in hers, his other hand reaching toward Nsikan. And for the first time, there was no distance, because family is not built by blood alone. It is built by presence, by truth, by the courage to stay. And in a house once ruled by silence, a new story had begun, one not defined by loss, but by healing, by justice, and by a voice that finally found its way home. Sometimes life doesn't break us all at once. It does it slowly, quietly, in ways no one else can see. And sometimes healing comes the same way, not with grand gestures, but with small acts of kindness repeated over time. Amara had nothing. No power, no money, no protection, but she had something far more powerful: presence, patience, and a heart that refused to walk away. And in the end, that was what brought a silent child back to life. Nsikan had everything the world could offer, but he learned the hard way that wealth cannot replace attention, and control cannot replace love. And Tunde, he reminds us that even when a voice is lost, it is never truly gone. Sometimes it's just waiting for the right person to make it feel safe enough to return. So wherever you are watching from today, tell me your country and what time it is right now. I'd love to hear from you. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Because stories like this remind us of something we all need, that kindness is never wasted. And sometimes it changes everything.